Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let's just come back to Jose Ibarra, if we can. You know who that is. That's a question. You know what he did?
I know what he's accused of doing.
Which is?
Murdering a young woman.
And that wasn't the first crime that he committed in this country, was it?
Senator, as I've articulated previously, I'm not going to speak about the facts of the case because there is an ongoing criminal investigation.
Have you read his parole file?
Senator, same answer.
So you're not going to say whether or not you've read the parole file? I've got it right here. Have you read this?
Senator, I do not want to speak to the particulars of the case given the pending criminal prosecution.
Now, I find this interesting because this is a new answer today. You've changed your answers all over the map on this, and it looks like to me you just don't want to answer the question. 2 days ago, you were asked about this in the House Homeland Security Committee. I've got the transcript right here in front of me. You were asked the same question. Jose Ibarra, why was he paroled? You said, I don't know. You said, I don't know. I don't have the case details with me today. Congressman Bishop says, you don't know? And you said, I don't know. I don't have the details with respect to that individual's case, but I would be pleased to provide them to you, Congressman. You didn't know 2 days ago. Now, interestingly, on April the 10th, 6 days before that, you gave Senator Katie Britt a different answer. She asked you the same question. She said, why was Jose Ibarra paroled into the United States? You said, and I quote, Ranking Member Britt, there was no derogatory information of which we were aware. So you were happy to comment on the case then, on April the 10th. By April the 16th, you had developed amnesia, and today you say you just won't comment. So which is it, Mr. Secretary? Now that we have the file, I'll tell you what the difference is. Congressman Bishop didn't have the parole file, and Senator Britt didn't have the parole file, and now we do have the parole file. And now we all know that the reason he was paroled into this country was because lack of detention capacity, which, as you and I both know, is not a valid reason under the statute. And now that we know that for sure, this is right out of the parole file. Here it is. Subject was paroled due to detention capacity at the Central Processing Center in El Paso, Texas. Now suddenly you don't want to talk about it. This is extraordinary. It's also a pattern with you. So let me just try one more time. Have you read the parole file?
Senator, I'm going to give the same answer, and let me say it.
Well, which one? Are you going to give me the answer you gave to Senator Britt? Are you going to give the answer you gave to Congressman Bishop, or the answer you gave to Senator Paul, or do you want to try a fourth one?
Senator, I will not speak to the particulars of the case, given the pending criminal prosecution.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Well, you certainly, of course you don't want to, because it is an absolutely damning indictment of your policies. Let's just review Jose Ibarra, and how he came to be here. On September the 8th, 2022, he was encountered by United States Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, and was paroled into the United States due to lack of detention capacity. A provision, a proviso, a rule that is not permitted under the statute. You and I both know you know this. You knew it when you were talking to Congressman Bishop. You knew it when you were testifying to Senator Britt, and you know it today. You just never wanted to cop to it because the statute doesn't permit it. And so you lied to Congressman Bishop and you lied to Senator Britt. And now you are hiding behind the ongoing prosecution excuse because it's the last one left to you, because you testified falsely under oath. Then on July 19th, 2023, Ibarra reports for a biometric appointment and was fingerprinted. This is now in New York. The results come back and indicate he has a criminal history. So he's in this country, he has a criminal history. September 14th, he is arrested in New York by NYPD for what? Injuring a child. September 14th, 2023, he is arrested for injuring a child. What happens? The offense was never prosecuted and the arrest was expunged. I'm reading right out of the parole file. Expunged. Nothing is done to this guy. He had a criminal record to start with. He's in the country on illegal grounds. You have falsely and illegally allowed him in. He commits a crime against a child. He's not prosecuted. It's expunged. In November, get this, in November, Ibarra files an application for employment authorization. And unbelievably, on December the 9th, 2023, it's approved. So this is your policies in action, Mr. Secretary. A criminal is permitted into this country on grounds flatly not permitted, flatly contradictory to the statute. He commits a crime against a child, and then he gets a work permit. He gets a work permit. You want to know why all of the jobs in the last 2 or 3 years have gone to illegal migrants? working people in this country can't get a job, their unemployment rate's high. Why? Because of things like this. And then what's he do? Well, we all know. Then in February, he commits the heinous crime against Laken Riley. Is this a record that you are proud of?
Senator, you've misstated some facts.
I have read from the parole file, which you have said you don't recall, don't have, you miscited. I'm reading from it. It is right here. And I've just, pursuant to the speech and debate clause, I have just read it into the record. And the reason is, you have lied repeatedly to Congress and to the American people about this. They deserve to know. And the only way they're going to know is if I tell them. I've just told them. It's in the record now. I've read it verbatim from the parole file. Verbatim. I just want to know, why did you change your story so often? Why didn't you just answer honestly to Congressman Bishop and Senator Britt?
Senator, I am confident that justice will be vindicated in the criminal prosecution of the case.
Well, hopefully he'll get more of a trial than you got. Otherwise, there'll be no justice for anyone at all. Let me ask you something else. Travis Wolf, do you know that name?
Not off the top of my head.
Travis Wolf is a 12-year-old boy from Missouri. This is him. Travis was killed on December 20th, 2023, or I should say he was in a tragic attack on that night. He died some weeks later, head-on collision. The person driving the vehicle, who's now been charged with 6 criminal counts, is Indrina Bracco. Do you know who that is?
I do not, but let me communicate that I know that all of our hearts break for the family of this young boy who died in that accident.
Well, she's an illegal migrant here from Venezuela. Local law enforcement tell me that she was detained briefly at the border in 2023 and then released. And then she commits this crime. Multiple people have been stabbed in O'Fallon, Missouri by illegal migrants. Mr. Secretary, I know that you think your policies are a success. You've sat right there in that chair and you've told me over and over our policies are working. You're on the record years and years saying that. Maybe they're working for you. Maybe they're working for your political objectives, whatever they may be. I don't know. But they're not working for Laken Riley or Travis Wolf or the people of my state. They are, in fact, a travesty. What you have done is a travesty. And, sir, it is long past time for you to go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And recognize right now Ranking Member Paul for his comments.
Secretary Mayorkas, under your administration, the Biden administration, over 1 million people have been paroled. What is the criteria you use for paroling individuals?
Ranking Member Paul, the parole process is one that we execute according to the law. We make individualized determinations with respect to significant public benefit or an urgent humanitarian reason.
So for what reason was the alleged killer of Laken Riley, Jose Ibarra, paroled and allowed to come into this country?
Ranking Member Paul, first and foremost, all our hearts break for the family of Ms. Riley. Secondly, the perpetrator of this heinous criminal act needs to meet justice to the fullest extent of the law, and I will not comment on the particulars of the case because the matter is being prosecuted by authorities now.
This isn't on the case of whether or not he murdered her. This is on the case of why you paroled him. Why was he paroled?
My same answer, Ranking Member Paul.
You're refusing to answer the question?
I have provided my answer, Ranking Member Paul.
You're refusing to give any specifics about Jose Ibarra. Well, I have the documentation, and the document says that the subject, the person accused of killing Laken Riley, was paroled due to detention capacity. It was full. So is detention capacity statutorily allowed to be used as a reasoning for parole?
Allow me to assure you that individuals who pose a public safety threat or national security are our highest priority for detention. The reality, not just with respect to this administration, but every administration that precedes me, is that the number of encounters has exceeded the number of detention beds available.
The question is it statutorily, legally allowed to use the excuse that our camp is full? He was paroled due to detention capacity. Is that allowed under the law?
Ranking Member Paul, my prior answer stands.
which means you're not going to answer the question. Are you pleading the Fifth Amendment?
No, Ranking Member Paul, I've answered the question. That
Well, no, you haven't. The question's very specific. You have testified previously, and you have testified today that there are two reasons you can be paroled: urgent humanitarian need or significant public benefit. That's not the reason listed. The reason listed is parole due to detention capacity. Is parole due to detention capacity a lawful reason for paroling someone?
Ranking Member Paul, there are different bases for parole. I am not a legal expert in this regard, but let me assure you that when an individual is encountered at the border and they are deemed to be, at the time of encounter, a threat to public safety or national security, they are a priority for detention. If not, they receive a notice to appear and are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. The number of individuals encountered at the border exceed the number of beds available in our detention facilities. That is not something specific to this administration. That is something that has been true.
You might have more beds if they remained in Mexico. Did the administration, when you came into office, reversed 92 executive orders of the Trump administration, which allowed them to apparently have people remain in Mexico, allowed them to have, probably 90% less parolees than you have? And so when you come to us and you say, oh, gosh, if we only had more legislation, we could do it, why don't you bring back the executive orders of Donald Trump that seem to be working? You immediately got rid of them for political purposes. The border's a disaster. Why don't you bring back the 92 executive orders that you reversed?
I respectfully, Ranking Member Paul, disagree with the premise of your question.
That's because you refuse to look at the facts, and it's still, I guess, insulting to all of us and insulting to the memory of Laken Riley and to the memory of others who have been killed by people who came into this country. March 2nd, an illegal alien who got into the country as a getaway killed Washington State Trooper Christopher Gadd. Haitian man who entered the U.S. via the CHNV parole program was arrested for sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. March 21st, illegal aliens in El Paso rushed the fence. You saw that on national television. An illegal alien on March 23rd murdered 25-year-old Michigan resident Ruby Garcia. Chinese national came across the border and illegally breached a military base in California. I mean, the stories go on, and I think a lot of people in America are going to be appalled, that you refuse to answer the questions. Jose Ibarra, was it lawful to parole him? Was it lawful to let him in the country because you say the camp's full?
Ranking Member Paul, is a former federal prosecutor for 12 years. I can say with tremendous conviction that individuals who commit criminal acts need to be held accountable for their crimes.
Well, that's not much consolation if you wait until after he's murdered somebody. See, part of the problem is, and I think people would be aghast to know this, that when you come in, you just give people your name, right? It's the honor system. There may be some databases you check, but certainly most of the domestic crimes in Venezuela probably are not in any kind of international database. So if you waltz into the country through your generous parole programs and say, I'm John Smith from Venezuela, you have no way of ascertaining that, and you still let them go. So you say, well, we're going to make sure that they're not a violent criminal. You have no way. You look in some databases, maybe they're not in the database, but you have no way of even knowing if that's their name. Then you give them biometric, you give them, you give them fingerprints. Now they have a new name and fingerprints. They essentially have been given a new identity by your agency. I don't know. I'm just so sickened and sad by the families that have lost loved ones from this. I don't see real remorse. I don't see you're willing to answer the questions. I mean, if it were me, I would be so upset by this. I would be doing everything possible to make sure that another Jose Ibarra doesn't get in. But apparently you let his brother in, too, and his brother's got a rap sheet 10 times longer than Jose does. And so, I don't know. All I can express is disappointment and bewilderment that the Democrats let you get away with it.
Secretary Mayorkas, you and I have spent a lot of time together. I would dare say that you and I have spent more time together than anyone on this dais. you and I both know there are things the executive branch can do, and there are things that Congress can do to be able to attack this. The challenge becomes trying to get those things implemented to be able to do it. There's a rumor that's out there that the administration's considering a change in 212F authorities, and that there may be some new executive authority used during this time period. Can you give us some insight of what that might be and what is under consideration?
Senator, I'm very proud of the time that we spent together negotiating what would have been a transformative solution to our broken immigration system. We in the government consider consistently all the time what options are available to us. That is the responsibility of good government. We have not made any decisions that I'm in a position to announce today, but I can assure you that we consider all the options before us in executing our responsibilities to the American people.
You have an idea of a time period when that might be implemented? I know you're making some considerations on that. When would we know?
There has been no decision made yet. I don't have a time frame to present to you.
There were clearly, as Senator Johnson mentioned, there are clearly differences in how President Trump enforced the border. There's also differences in how President Obama enforced the border than how it's currently being done now through the same executive authorities of things that were out there. The negotiated agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador at the time that President Trump had achieved, we don't have that same kind of agreement with them. I've had some Guatemalan leaders that have reached out to me and said, we want to reestablish some of those same type of agreements that are there to be able to get that. We don't have some of the same enforcement mechanisms. I know the court stepped back in and said the Remain in Mexico, the MPP, we've got to be able to reinstitute. The facility was changed on it, but the enforcement is different. There are differences that are there. I think what needs to be done here is President Biden, DHS, to use all the levers that you have to be able to enforce the border, as President Obama did and as President Trump did. This Congress also has a responsibility as well. What we had negotiated together was doubling the number of deportation flights, dramatically increasing the number of detention beds, increasing agents, increasing officers, increasing the number of immigration judges, increasing asylum officers, changing the definition of asylum so that there's a more rapid turnaround in that process, changing the process for expedited removal so that you're not hamstrung with some of the court decisions that have been made in the past. All of those things were dramatic changes that Congress needs to do. So I've been hard on members here to say we've got work that we've got to do, but you and I have had frank conversations as well to be able to say there are things that the administration can do. I encourage State Department to be more focused on recalcitrant countries and turning people around. I encourage Department of Justice to be more clear on enforcement of things that they're not doing either right now. But the frustration that you hear from the dais here is a sense that, yeah, Congress has things that we need to do, but we don't feel like State Department, DOJ, and DHS is using every tool at their resource. So I would tell you, we're eager to see the 212F and what is being determined at this point and what can be done, because this last number I saw, I think we had about 5,800 people that crossed yesterday. And so obviously that's an intolerable number for everybody on it. If I can ask a quick question as well, you and I have talked several times about special interest aliens. This is a different group out there that's been difficult to get information about. It's a group that DHS has defined for a while as folks with a potential for a national security risk. We understand there are thousands of individuals that have been designated as a special interest alien, but we can't get any information on it. This committee that has the oversight has had one briefing on it, and it was last year. That was a bipartisan briefing, and Senator Sinema and I worked for months to be able to get that one classified briefing on it. Since that briefing time, we've asked for a follow-up, and we've gotten nothing on it to get details. How many special interest aliens? Where are they coming from? What are the details on those? These are folks that your team has identified as a potential national security risk. We don't know how they're being handled, but it is our understanding thousands of them are being released. Can you give us any clarity on that, and can you give us a time that we'll be able to get access to that information about those folks?
Senator, I'm very disappointed to hear that you feel that we haven't provided you with the information you've requested with respect to special interest aliens. I will work with my team to ensure a briefing of those of you who are interested in this very important subject in an appropriate setting.
Great. We have followed up. I have a list here of the number of requests. We've had 6 formal requests to your office just this calendar year, and every time we've not received an answer to it. So we absolutely need more information about this because that's a very special concern to us to try to figure out how do we actually get that resolved. On the budget request that's coming out, when you and I worked on the supplemental piece, we included funding for 50,000 detention beds and for deportation flights to be dramatically increased. Part of the issue was, obviously, if we're releasing people, especially single adults, it just increases the number of people that are coming. If we don't turn people around, there aren't immediate consequences, then more people just come because there's a delayed consequence, which is really no consequence. So my question is, in the budget request, we're to 34,000 beds for budget request. Why that number when we know we could get up to 50,000, or at least to 40,000 we could get up to? Why a lower number in a budget request rather than the number that you know you need?
Senator, you know, the budget is, of course, presented under the context of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Our 2025 budget was presented before the 2024 budget was enacted. We fully support the 41,500 detention beds that were presented in the fiscal year 2024 budget. I continue to believe that in the context of the Senate's bipartisan legislation, the 50 or 55,000 beds was an advancement in our efforts, and we look forward to working with this committee and Congress on funding the detention beds that are needed.
I hope that's so. We've got to be able to get that resolved. That's a serious issue that only Congress can resolve, but we've got to be able to implement. We need the White House to also make the request on it. One last thing I'll just ask for the record, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, on this. DHS Ombudsman for Citizenship and Immigration Services found this statement: the parole programs that are currently being used at our southern border that are allowing more people to come in, the parole programs require diverting funding and employee resources within USCIS from other immigration programs. We've experienced this in our office. It's become harder for legal immigration. And the Ombudsman is saying it's because some of these resources are being funneled to the border processing parole there. Love to have a statement back from your office in writing on if that's true, what's being done to be able to change it. If it's not true, why is that not true?